This channel is great, unpredictable, fire. I'm saying, a gem channel.
It's late September 2001, and Robert Stevens is walking home from his office at the Sun newspaper in Boca Raton, Florida.
It's
For
spooky.
weeks, one title has dominated headlines across America and the world: the horrific terror attacks on the World Trade Center on September 11th, less than a month earlier. With the nation still reeling and the threat of terrorism at their doorstep, no one can say for certain what the future holds. But for photo editor Robert Stevens, he walks home with a news story to tell his family about a strange envelope his office received, filled with an unknown white powder.
Yeah, alright, now,
At the time,
oh
no
my
one knew what
god,
the
now it's
substance
coming to
was
me,
or
now
what it
I'm
meant.
remembering what
The
this shit's
office
about.
didn't think much of it.
I heard about this.
Robert didn't either. He was looking forward to the vacation he was about to take with his wife, a road trip to North Carolina. But in a few days, Robert began to feel ill. On October 2nd, he was hospitalized. Then, less than a week later, on October 5th, Robert Stevens was dead. The cause? Anthrax, making him the first American to die of anthrax in over 25 years. But he wouldn't be the last. In the months to come, dozens more will fall ill as poisoned envelopes flow through the heart of the American postal system. With hundreds of suspects and thousands of hours spent searching, this case would force the FBI to challenge everything they thought they knew and kick off the largest bioterrorism investigation the nation had ever seen.
A man has contracted a very rare and potentially deadly form of anthrax.
Rare inhaled.
What movie was it where they had the scene where the motherfucker opened the envelope, dropped all on his lap, and then the whole fucking like hazard crew had to come in? He's like sitting there, he's trying not to move and shit, trying not to like breathe in the fumes. Like, oh, that was a good movie though. I don't know if it was Wolf on Wall Street. I don't think it was.
Tuesday to allow a complete sweep for traces of anthrax.
Not the anthrax killer.
Ooh, we got suspects?
Immediately following the attacks on 9/11, America and the world found themselves on the precipice of a new kind of war, whose greatest weapon wasn't guns or artillery, but terror. And while authorities across the nation scrambled to find out how an attack of this scale could have occurred on American soil, the FBI seemed to be worried about something else. They'd gotten credible reports that Al-Qaeda was planning a second biological attack on U.S. soil. So when FBI agents found out that a photo editor in Florida had been diagnosed with inhalation anthrax, something that no American had been diagnosed with for decades, they took the concern seriously.
Yeah, that's pretty obvious. You think, I'm not, advocating for it, but like, you think if you're a terrorist organization, you wouldn't be so obvious. Like, maybe let's not use the one drug that definitely doesn't kill anybody unless it's on purpose.
It can wrap itself into a hard outer coating, like a shell, to protect itself and survive the harsh conditions. It can survive in this hibernation-like state for years or decades until the conditions are normal again, which is when it wakes up. Those shells, or spores as they're called, can enter the human body through inhalation, ingestion, or cuts in the skin. And once they're in, the spore turns back into the bacteria, eventually causing the disease we know as anthrax. Although anthrax can cause death in any of its forms, inhalation anthrax is not only the most rare form of infection, but also the most deadly.
Damn.
Since 1900, there had been only 18 cases of inhalation anthrax recorded in the US, of which only 2 people survived. Usually, the people who got inhalation anthrax were textile or livestock workers who caught it while working with infected animals. But for Robert Stevens, who worked in a simple suburban office far from any naturally occurring anthrax bacteria, the diagnosis of the rarest form of anthrax was hard to believe. If it hadn't been contracted from natural sources, the only other possibility was intentional infection. Anthrax had been used in the past as a biological weapon by various terrorist groups, and even developed by the US as part of their biological weapons program until 1969. But the process of turning anthrax
that shit's gotta be spooky though. Like, how do you even, what if you fuck up, you're on the job, you spill some powder, like, oh shit, I'm fucked, like I breathed the dust in or whatever the fuck. Damn.
But if a terrorist organization had somehow found the capacity to carry this out, the consequences would be devastating. Because of the heightened tension and risk after 9/11, authorities used all avenues at their disposal to investigate the case. After confirming Robert Stevens did in fact die from anthrax, their first concern was, where did the anthrax come from? To answer this question, the FBI sent samples of Robert Stevens' spinal fluid to CDC labs throughout the country, and with the nation's top scientists on the case, officials hoped that they could identify the strain or
I don't know how I
type
feel
of
about that. I feel like if I die, bro, like you gotta figure that out on your own, bro. You ain't meddling with my body.
Hopefully backtrack to the origin of the
well,
infection.
they gotta save other people. I get it,
After extensive
but
testing, scientists found that it was a strain of anthrax called Ames that had infected Robert. The Ames strain of anthrax is naturally occurring and found in nature, but extremely rare. It's much more common in labs, used by experts in controlled environments for research. So, to scientists working on the case, the odds that Robert Stevens accidentally inhaled wild anthrax bacteria was too much of a coincidence. But considering the extensive precautions lab technicians took when working with the bacteria, there was virtually no way for it to have accidentally escaped a lab and infected a civilian. It looked like there was only one answer. Robert Stevens was deliberately infected. Now that the authorities knew the strain and the symptoms associated with the infection, they told hospitals in the area to keep an eye out for other patients exhibiting the same illness, and it didn't take long for another patient to be identified. Ernesto Blanco had been hospitalized with similar symptoms in Miami, less than an hour away from Robert Stevens. And although doctors couldn't find actual anthrax bacteria in his bodily fluids, they could find traces of anthrax DNA in spores in his chest and nose.
Damn.
What's more, both he and Robert Stevens worked at AMI. Stevens as a photo editor and Blanco as a mailman.
His drive a lot
With two people
farther
from
though.
the same office checking into hospital with the same strange symptoms, the likelihood of a coincidence was growing thin. Hoping they were wrong, the FBI, working closely with the CDC, quietly sampled Stevens' workspace. Coming in after the office was closed in efforts to avoid scaring the public, authorities collected 56 samples from the AMI office and tested them for anthrax. Upon testing, 2 samples came back with a positive result.
Damn.
The samples from Stevens' keyboard and inside his mailbox. The results were clear. Live anthrax spores had been found in the building, and the FBI were left with no other choice than to shut the office down.
Damn.
With the AMI offices closed, officials
Yo,
now
what are
had
you
to
doing
find
in that
out whether
situation if
anyone
like
else from the office had
you work
come
in a
into
big
contact
office
with
and the
anthrax
office next
spores?
door gets
To
fucking
do this, all
finessed
AMI
with
employees,
anthrax?
their
Like you
families,
quitting?
and
And
anyone
like I
who
don't know if I
visited
quit,
the
but I'd be
office
like,
in
hey
the last
dog,
2
be like,
months were required to
we gotta
test for
call it,
possible
bro. We gotta, you know what I'm
anthrax
saying?
poisoning. All the while, the media were hungry for answers. Reports that anthrax spores had been found in an office building in Florida stole headlines, with the subsequent closed-off building being referred to as Camp Anthrax. To avoid a national panic right on the heels of 9/11, authorities assured the public that there was no evidence yet that this was part of a terrorist attack.
Based on what we know at this point, it appears that it's an isolated case. I want to make sure that everybody understands that anthrax is not contagious and is not communicable, which means it is not spread from person to person.
But the scenes of heavily protected hazmat suit-wearing officials hosing down after entering the building did little to quell concerns. And as more and more people were being tested and more office spaces sampled, results were starting to come in. Another AMI worker, Stephanie Daly, had tested positive for exposure to anthrax spores, and her desk, chair, and workspace all contained live anthrax. Her job consisted mainly of opening the mail. So let's recap.
Damn.
Robert Stevens' mailbox had live anthrax. Ernesto Blanco, the mailman,
Yo,
had
I'd be
contracted
pissed
the
if
anthrax-like
I'd catch the
sickness,
disease and
and
it's like
Stephanie
I'm
Daly,
just
whose job consisted of
you know.
opening the mail, had also been infected.
like I didn't
This
really
led
have
the
because I
FBI
think it
to
was
believe
like
that the spores
like I don't
seemed to
know.
have been spread through the mail.
It's
even
in
though
his
they hadn't
mail
found
though,
the
you
actual
know.
letter itself.
I think it's a more
But just as
personal
they
thing.
thought
Like
they
if
had
you're
the
delivering the mail,
situation
I kind of be like,
contained,
damn, bro,
another case
I'm the
came to
middleman.
light.
The fuck is
This
this?
one, right back where it all started.
Good evening. Tonight we find ourselves in the unusual and unhappy position of reporting on one of our beloved colleagues, a member of my personal staff who has contracted a cutaneous anthrax infection.
Holy shit.
Another news organization, this time in the heart of New York City. An employee at the NBC News headquarters at the historic 30 Rockefeller Plaza in Manhattan had tested positive for cutaneous anthrax, which means she was infected through her skin. She had been sifting through the letters intended for the show's news anchor, Tom Brokaw, and upon opening one, powder spilled out. Another news agency, another letter, another positive case. A pattern was emerging, but this time, the FBI hoped they could finally get their hands on the origin of the infection. Quickly after the confirmation of the anthrax diagnosis, officials sped to New York to look for the letter that infected the employee, and this time, they found it. Tucked into a clear bag in the security office was an inconspicuous letter slowly leaking a coarse powder. Working quickly, FBI agents sent the letter off to the health department for testing, and the result was overwhelmingly positive. A quote, zillion anthrax spores were found in the letter, all determined to have originated from the Ames strain, the same strain found at AMI. From Florida to New York, anthrax was spreading.
That Americans are stocking up on emergency equipment in case there is a bioterrorist attack.
Yes, we sell gas masks.
Federal officials advise against making such purchases, but Richard Geist, the vice president of operations of Uncle Sam's Army Navy store in New York City, says that's not stopping anyone.
Normally, out of a location like this, we would sell 3 or 4 a week, and now we're selling 300 or 400 a day.
Damn.
Case upon case,
Business
multiple
booming.
people across New York were now confirmed to have been infected with anthrax. At ABC News, an employee's 7-month infant son was infected after visiting the office a few weeks earlier. The same went for an employee at CBS, and for most of these people, a main part of their job was handling mail. But beyond confirmed cases, anthrax anxiety had seeped into the streets, with thousands of people across the country flooding emergency rooms convinced that they had been exposed with anthrax. People were calling the police about any white powder they found even remotely suspicious. What's worse, following the newer attacks, subsequent copycat hoaxes were also making the FBI's jobs harder, as they were forced to chase down every possible lead, wasting precious time and resources. But now, with an original infected letter, the FBI finally had a lead.
The letters sent to NBC and the New York Post were the same. This is next. Take penicillin now. Death to America, death to Israel, Allah is great.
It was a terrifying message and fed right into the American public's ever-growing fear of jihadist terrorism. Not only that, but the sender was using something that sat at the core of the American economy, the postal system, to deliver his terror. Offices were beginning to receive training on how to proceed with letters containing suspicious powder, training that would soon prove necessary. It had only been days since the NBC letter had been found by police, and as news outlets reported feverishly on the newfound threat in New York City, a young intern at U.S. Senator Tom Daschle's office in Washington, D.C. was opening his mail. In the pile was a thick envelope supposedly addressed from a 4th grade class in New Jersey. Excited to see what the children had written the senator, the intern carefully cut open the letter, and from the corners, a fine white powder spilled out and fell onto her lap. Like all the others, she had just been exposed to anthrax. There were almost 30 people in the office at the time the letter was opened, not including the dozens more put at risk as a result of the spores moving through the vents of the building. Each person would now need to be safely removed, decontaminated, tested, and given a 3-day precautionary supply of Cipro, an antibiotic used to treat anthrax infections. Of the thousands of staffers tested, epidemiologists determined that when the letter was opened, around 100 people had inhaled a lethal dose of anthrax spores and would need to be monitored for months to receive treatment. Within 24 hours, 12 Senate offices were closed due to exposure, followed quickly by the shutdown of all of Capitol Hill. Within days, Senate office buildings were shut down and Congress was forced to adjourn. This single envelope had completely halted operations in one of the most important buildings in American politics, at a time when extremely controversial policies
I'm not gonna lie, the news in the early 2000s had to be wild.
To Leader Daschle. His office received a letter. And
like nowadays, me and my friends, well, sometimes, you know, some shit's on the news and it's like some big shit, yeah, you're gonna hear about it. But like, I feel like back then it was like you turn on the TV, that's really the only thing you did, right? It's like you didn't have any, like, you didn't have a phone to like be distracted with.
This newest letter, however, was different from the rest. Earlier letters sent to media outlets like NBC contained a coarse, gritty powder that did not easily become airborne, resulting mostly in infections through the skin rather than inhalation. The letter sent to Senator Daschle, however, contained an extremely fine powder that floated into the air when opened and was inhaled by hundreds as it spread through the vents. This meant whoever the killer was, their skills were getting better, making them infinitely more dangerous. But this letter did not simply appear in Capitol Hill. It had to pass through many hands to reach its recipient. Before reaching Senator Daschle's office, it had already moved through major postal hubs, first the Trenton Processing and Distribution Center in New Jersey, then the Brentwood facility in Washington, D.C.
At the present time, I'm not worried, only because of the 2 letters that had passed through the processing plant were tested negative. But if someone tests positive for the anthrax, then I will be very concerned.
In the days following, multiple postal workers at the Trenton Center would be diagnosed with anthrax, causing the building to close for testing and decontamination. The story at Brentwood, on the other hand, was entirely different. As one of the final stops for the millions of letters delivered to Capitol Hill, workers at the Brentwood facility were terrified by this new threat traveling through the mail. While buildings around Capitol Hill were being shut down, they hoped their bosses would take the danger just as seriously. But as the days passed and the processing center remained open, that hope faded, and workers began to lose faith in those in charge.
Okay, you weren't the one that handled the envelope, it was somebody else?
No, I didn't handle it, but I was in the vicinity.
Okay, and do you know what they did with the envelope?
I don't know anything. I don't know anything. I couldn't even find out if the stuff was or wasn't.
I was told that it wasn't, but I have a tendency not to believe these people.
The day after the Capitol Hill shutdown, the USPS Postmaster General held a press conference insisting to the public that the Brentwood facility is still safe to remain open, stating that,
as you know, one letter from among the more than 3.5 million pieces of mail handled here each day contained anthrax. That letter was extremely well sealed, and there is only a minute chance that anthrax spores escaped.
To prove how serious they were taking the threat, they committed to what they called appropriate testing, which, unlike the procedure at Capitol Hill, meant that only some employees would be tested for exposure, not all. The facility would be tested for anthrax spores, but in the meantime, workers would be provided gloves and masks.
So they said, we don't give a fuck. The mail gotta go.
It didn't take long for workers to begin falling ill with mysterious symptoms.
Oh, fuck.
First, Leroy Richmond was admitted to the hospital with fever, headaches, and tightness in his chest. Then, Keith McQuarrier checked in, suffering from unrelenting headaches. Next, Thomas Morris called 911 with severe flu-like symptoms after his condition had steadily worsened over several days.
My breathing is very, very labored.
How old are you?
55.
Damn.
I don't know if I have been, but I suspect that I might have been exposed to anthrax. My breathing is labored. My chest feels constricted. I am getting air, but to get up and walk and what have you, feels like I might just pass out if I stay up too long. So I'm just saying.
Okay, which place?
Finally, Joseph Gersine was turned away from the hospital with a diagnosis of stomach flu, only for his condition to rapidly deteriorate as his symptoms became far more severe. Each of these people would be diagnosed with anthrax, but of the 4, only 2 would survive. Thomas Morris and Joseph Gersine both succumbed to their illness, making them the 2nd and 3rd people to die of anthrax in the last month. Devastated and angry, workers fought for their concerns to be taken seriously.
That's weak as shit, bro. Goddamn, you gotta run the fucking test. I mean, it's coming through the mail. You're the mail, and you're not gonna run any test. Like, well, no, they did run the test, but like, what do you mean important tests? The whole fucking thing's important.
And while all those exposed at Capitol Hill survived, Brentwood saw 2 colleagues die before their facility was closed for decontamination. Eventually, 4 whole days after the shutdown of Capitol Hill, the Brentwood facility would be shut down for testing and decontamination. When the results of this testing was released, many felt that it was too little, too late. The CDC revealed that there were 14 hotspots identified in the facility, all surrounding sorting machine 17. During the sorting process, these machines squeezed the letter, so when the Dasha letter passed through it, the machine squeezed the highly refined anthrax spores out. What's worse was that when paper dust accumulated in these machines, they would be cleaned by air hose, so not only was the anthrax squeezed out of the envelope, the air hose was blowing it into the air, allowing any worker around machine 17 to inhale the airborne spores. With the death toll rising to 3 and the ultimate shutdown of multiple mailing facilities as well as Capitol Hill, the threat of anthrax was only growing within the country. More and more letters were being discovered, from the one at NBC to another one sent to the New York Post weeks earlier, which led to a cutaneous anthrax diagnosis in one of its workers.
Cutaneous?
Even the Senator Dasha letter was not the only one to turn up in Capitol Hill, as FBI agents later tracked down another letter sent to Senator Leahy that had not yet been opened. Both of these envelopes contained the same ultrafine anthrax powder and a note that read, "You cannot stop us. We have this anthrax. You die now. Are you afraid? Death to America. Death to Israel. Allah is great."
Yo, I'm not gonna
With
lie, they all got the
dozens
same
being infected in the
handwriting
span
though.
of just weeks,
They only
the
got
population was growing
they got
into a
one
frenzy.
English speaker
The
and that
antibiotic
bitch.
Cipro used to treat anthrax infections were
That's
falling
not funny.
off
That's
shelves, and
fucked
even
up.
seeing shortages
But
as
imagine.
people panic bought the
It's
medication.
like his job and shit.
It wouldn't be long before more people began dying of the infection. First Kathy Nguyen, a hospital worker from New York, then in late November, Audley Lundgren, a retiree in Oxford, Connecticut, marking the 5th death from anthrax in the span of 2 months.
Damn. Chapter 4.
We in the FBI are pleased this morning to join with Postmaster General Jack Potter to announce a reward of up to $1 million for information leading to the arrest and conviction of those responsible for terrorist acts of mailing anthrax.
The FBI, now more than ever, needed a break in the case, but the letters offered little in terms of evidence. The only thing they know is that the letter that infected Robert Stevens at AMI in Florida, the 2 New York letters to NBC and New York Post, and the 2 Washington letters to Senators Leahy and Daschle were all likely sent by the same person, as the content of the notes, the handwriting, and the strain of anthrax spores were all extremely similar. Even the envelopes used in each letter all came from the same batch, meaning it was almost certain that they had been sent by the same person. They also had one other thing in common. According to the postage stamp, they were all mailed out of Trenton, New Jersey. Although it's very unlikely a highly intelligent bioterrorist would mail anthrax-filled letters from their own hometown, it did mean that whoever mailed these letters had to have been close enough to Trenton, New Jersey that they could make the drive out there without arousing suspicion. This narrowed down the location of the sender to within approximately 100 miles from Trenton, New Jersey. Slowly but surely, the FBI were developing a profile. They had a rough location of where the sender could reside. They knew that the sender had to be someone who likely had access to the AIM strain of anthrax, meaning they had to have access to a lab as well as highly specialized lab equipment. Not only this, but they would need to be extremely knowledgeable about infectious diseases and skilled in microbiology to be able to create the highly refined anthrax spores. Beyond the sender's skills, FBI experts were also developing a psychological profile. Using the contents of the letters, experts noticed that some words were misspelled, like penicillin, and the many references to 9/11 and Islamic extremism seemed to be too on the nose, like someone trying too hard to mislead the FBI.
That's what I'm saying. You think it's on purpose? You think they're like fucking up? They're trying to fuck up because it's from fucking New Jersey.
With no evidence to suggest
like trying
that
to
they
fuck
had
up the
made their
English
way
and
over
everything.
to Iraq. This sender was most likely an American, a lonely, highly intelligent, and meticulous scientist living within 100 miles of Trenton, New Jersey. Not unlike the many experts working with the FBI on the case, agents were literally surrounded daily by people who fit the bill. But outside of the FBI situation rooms, the government was taking the case in an entirely different direction. Right on the heels of 9/11, the White House had continuously insinuated that the anthrax attacks were likely carried out by the same terrorists, conveniently allowing them to point the finger at their new favorite enemy, Iraq. These anthrax letters played a key role in the White House's case that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction that must be dealt with, setting the scene perfectly for the highly criticized invasion of Iraq.
Put that shit
These claims
down.
directly contradicted the FBI's own
Fucking drops it. Oh
once
no!
they had the idea,
Holy
they
shit!
wouldn't let it
That'd be
go.
fucked.
The only way to prove them wrong was for the FBI to find the real killer, and they started by looking from among themselves. More specifically, from within one of the only biological weapons labs in the U.S., the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases.
God damn, what a name.
The community of microbiologists
USAMRIID?
and infectious
Alright, I
disease
guess.
specialists with this kind of expertise was small, and if there was anyone who knew someone who fit the bill, it was the experts over at USAMRIID. With the perpetrator's profile circulating, it didn't take long for calls to come in, finally, with some real leads. The first promising lead came from an anonymous call. They named a scientist who used to work at USAMRIID, Dr. Stephen J. Hatfill. Dr. Hatfill was originally an employee at a major defense contractor, but only 3 weeks before the anthrax attacks began, his security clearance was suddenly revoked. Although it was not clear exactly why this occurred,
trying to sneak out that
many speculate
anthrax.
that it was likely because he had failed a polygraph test. For those working in highly secretive weapons labs, no security clearance basically meant no job, making this a devastating blow to his career, which according to the FBI
he had to get
agents,
back.
was a hint of a motive. Not only this, but as the FBI
said,
probed
"Fuck it, I lose
further
the
into
job,
his
you lose your
past,
life."
They found that Dr. Hatfill had also worked for the Rhodesian military during the Rhodesian Bush War. During his time there, the Rhodesian military was later suspected of using biological weapons to fight against the rebels. In fact, some people believe that the anthrax epidemic that occurred during the war, the largest recorded outbreak in history, which killed 182 people and infected over 10,000, was a result of a deliberate action of the Rhodesian military. All this while Hatfield claimed to be working there. With this, the FBI had what they called a person of interest. This was one of the very first times this term had been used. He was not yet a suspect, but still suspicious enough to warrant further investigation. Soon enough, the FBI had enough reason to question Hatfield about his connection to the case, and surprisingly, Hatfield was completely cooperative. He had told them everything they needed to know and allowed them to search his apartment, car, and storage locker. Despite his cooperation, there were some holes in the story he told the FBI agents, enough to be concerning. He had told them that he had not taken Cipro, the antibiotic necessary to treat anthrax infections, in the months leading up to 9/11, but according to his pharmacy records, he had filled that prescription twice. Once 2 days before the New York letters were mailed, and once again 2 days before the Capitol Hill letters.
I don't know.
Not only that, but a search of his computer revealed a novel Hatfield was in the process of writing, called Emergence. The plot followed a man who intended to attack the White House with a biological weapon, a plague that killed those who came in contact with it. Agents were beginning to connect the dots, and what came together did not look good for Dr. Stephen Hatfield. Thinking he had nothing to fear if he had nothing to hide, Hatfield signed a release to allow the FBI to search his apartment. Little did he know, when his apartment was searched, it would be in full view of the many news cameras standing by. The information about a potential suspect had leaked, and now Hatfield was no longer just a name on the person of interest board. To America, he was now the face of the anthrax killer. With the massive publicity, Hatfield could barely move without being watched, by the FBI or otherwise. His phones were tapped, his friends interviewed, cameras were even placed outside of his girlfriend's house, hoping to catch him doing something that could warrant an arrest. He was being watched so closely that an FBI surveillance car had even driven over his foot, after which he was issued a $5 ticket from the police for walking to create a hazard. For 2 years, there was not a moment of respite. In that time, he lost jobs and was shunned from society, slowly falling deeper into alcoholism to cope with his new reality.
Today, I again appear before the TV cameras. I want to look my fellow Americans directly in the eye and declare to them, I am not the anthrax killer. I know nothing about the anthrax attacks. I had absolutely nothing to do with this terrible crime. My life is being destroyed by arrogant government bureaucrats who are peddling ground.
The FBI, on the other hand, were working hard to find any solid evidence that could link Hatfield to the anthrax killer.
Well, it's looking like they fucked him up.
Nothing was showing up. They had interviewed all of Hatfield's friends and colleagues with no luck. At one point, investigators staked their hopes on a few bloodhounds, hoping that they could pick up the scent of the sender and track it.
That shit kind of look
When
good,
the dogs
don't it?
identified Hatfield's
And the brown bag, you got the brown bag and the white bag, you better fuck something up, dog. That's, hey man. You know what I'm saying? That's not fast food, that's food, you know what I'm saying? That's food, you might get it fast, but it ain't fast food. You feel me? That's real food right there.
With 2 holes cut into it, originally thought to have
put the brown bag in a white plastic bag. That's about, you about business. You were on with that, man. Listen, you about to eat good. I feel like I'm making myself sound too fat. Let's not talk about more food.
Years had passed now, and the FBI had nothing to show for it. The top suspect, Stephen Hatfield, had been pursued to the point of exhaustion for both him and the FBI. The consequences of years of public scrutiny against Hatfield led him to file a lawsuit against the DOJ and various other news agencies for violating his privacy and destroying his reputation. A payout that earned him $5.8 million. By the mid-2000s, both government officials and much of the public were content to settle on blaming foreign terrorists for the attack.
And we're learning people in this world, want to terrorize our country by trying to take life. They won't succeed. This country is too strong to allow terrorists to affect the lives of our citizens.
Using that narrative to help justify the war in Iraq and controversial policies like the Patriot Act, despite the FBI's continued insistence that the perpetrator was most likely a homegrown American. The only question that remained now was who. The FBI had already made a series of ill-advised raids and arrests on innocent people, including Pakistani epidemiologist Irshad Sheikh. whose home was raided and family was arrested, all due to a bad tip. A tip that cost him his job at Johns Hopkins, his chance at American citizenship, and the trust of the people around him. The FBI could not afford another mistake.
That photo ain't helping
and
his
as
case.
time
He's looking
passed,
creepy as shit in
suspicion
that.
increasingly shifted to another scientist involved in the case, longtime collaborator Bruce Ivins. Ivins was an anthrax expert and one of the people responsible for developing the anthrax vaccine delivered to soldiers serving overseas.
Oh, well, that's
From the
good.
beginning of the investigation, his lab at USAMRIID had been tapped on to work the case alongside the FBI. But it wasn't just his knowledge of anthrax that put investigators on edge. It was also his almost suspicious level of interest in the case. Ivins had routinely called the FBI tip line about coworkers he thought might have been involved in sending the letters, and had even showed up to the pawn search uninvited, as a volunteer handing out warm drinks to officers during the search.
Oh, he's doing too
And it
fucking
wasn't
much.
just a few isolated incidents.
Fucking teacher's
Ivins
pet
had
out
a
here.
history of
You need
strange
coffee?
behavior with both
You need
coworkers
coffee?
and agents.
The fuck out
One
of here,
the first
dog.
people to alert the FBI about Bruce Ivins' strange behavior was fellow scientist Nancy Hagewood, who had met him in graduate school at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Their relationship was initially polite and professional, but it shifted after Ivins learned she had been a member of Kappa Kappa Gamma, at which point his interest escalated into an obsession. During her senior year, Hagewood was working late in the lab to complete her dissertation, carefully recording all of her findings in a single notebook, the only copy of her data. One day, she returned to find it missing from her desk. Devastated, she searched everywhere until she received an anonymous note stating that the notebook had been placed in a mailbox in Chapel Hill. After contacting police to check, her PhD notebook, with all of her research, was found at the bottom of the mailbox. When asked about who could have done it, she immediately thought of Ivins. Other incidents followed. On one occasion, someone spray-painted Kappa Kappa Gamma on her fence and car. She reported her suspicions about Ivins to police, but nothing came of it. Later, an opinion article
So he don't fuck with her because they went to different colleges?
Specifically Kappa Kappa Gamma was submitted to the Frederick Post under her name, even though she had not written it. Again, she believed Ivins was responsible. It was only years later that Nancy Hagewood began to suspect Bruce Ivins in the anthrax letters. The turning point was
So
an
you think he had
unsolicited
beef
email
with
he
you
sent to
in
her
your
and her
college?
colleagues with a photo of himself making anthrax without gloves. To her, this was not only a violation of lab safety, but also something of a proclamation that he was above it all.
That's a bit
That
fucking
it, quote,
wild, huh?
was an active in-your-face hubris to say, "I'm immune. I don't need to wear
It
gloves."
kind of seems like
FBI
he
reached out to
does
scientists
like it
to
kind of
share
seems
their
like he's
belief that
rubbing
the
her the
killer had
wrong
a
way.
microbiology
Like okay, yeah,
background.
maybe he's weird, but it
Nancy
sounds
knew
like
she had
she's
to
just
share her
fucking
concerns.
overdoing
Now,
it
an obsession
crazy.
with the
It was
sorority
him.
does not
He
a
took
killer
my
mark,
notebook.
but what Nancy
He took
didn't
my
know
note.
was
He
that
thinks he's
Bruce's
above
obsession
us.
with
He
PKG
did
actually
not wear
reflected the killer's
gloves.
own movements.
Like, bro, I'm not gonna lie, that all
Early on in
these
the
fucking
investigation,
science has
the
all been
FBI
weird so
tested
far.
all
Damn.
625 mailboxes in the city of Trenton, New Jersey.
She's
where
doing
the
too
letters
fucking
were mailed
much.
from. Only
I
one
knew it
came
was
back
him. I
positive
knew
for
it.
anthrax spores.
I knew it was him.
A
It's
blue
him.
mailbox in
The
front
fuck?
of
That
the
has
Kappa
nothing
Kappa
to do with-
sorority house
Oh,
in
shit.
Princeton, New Jersey. According to Bruce himself, his obsession with the sorority had often led him to drive hours to chapter houses, sometimes to attempt to steal items inside, other times just to stare at the houses for 10 minutes, then drive the 3 hours back. With all this strange information, the FBI paid a visit to Bruce at his office for an impromptu chat and a quick request to search his lab area. Bruce, ever the collaborator, agreed to the search. Little did he know that what they would find would place him firmly at the top of their suspect list. Anthrax samples, the AIM strain specifically,
Yeah, well, no
filled his
shit.
lab. Not uncommon for an anthrax researcher,
That's what I'm
except for the
saying.
fact that some samples were never shared with the FBI. In 2001, the FBI had subpoenaed labs across America to send in samples of each batch of the AIM strain anthrax that they carried. Not only had Bruce failed to send in all his samples, but also seemed to have deliberately sent in the wrong samples in certain cases. Immediately, the FBI sent the unseen anthrax sample for genetic testing. Although they knew that it was the AIM strain of anthrax used in the letters, each batch has a slightly different genetic code. Upon testing, researchers found that the anthrax powder from the letters was a genetic match to the samples pulled from the batch in Bruce's lab.
No,
the one he failed to
he's
send in.
caught up,
this
bro.
batch was called RMR 1029 and under the direct custodianship of Dr. Bruce Ivins. But the FBI needed more, so they began
How,
looking into
bro?
Bruce's
Literally
lab
him.
activity, where they found that in August 2001, Bruce spent over 10 times more hours in the lab than he usually does, with significant jumps in the days leading up to each anthrax letter mailing. When asked about why he was at the lab so late, he couldn't provide a coherent response. What
I
he
wasn't
did
making
talk about,
anthrax.
though, was his impromptu initiative to
I
test
wasn't
his
putting it in
workspace for
letters.
anthrax soon after the attacks, only to find anthrax solely in the area he was working in, after which he decontaminated his workspace without ever reporting it. With enough information now to take real action, the FBI finally got a warrant to formally search Bruce's lab to get as much information as they could, and one way to do that was by mirroring his computer. This way, investigators would have access to everything he had on it without having to take the computer itself. So, for the better part of 2007, FBI agents were tasked with sifting through thousands of emails sent and received by Bruce Ivins, and what they found showed a deeply troubled individual. Throughout 1998 to the time of the attacks, Bruce had been suffering from what was originally thought to be depression or bipolar disorder, but was later determined to have likely been paranoid personality disorder.
Oh shit.
He would discuss his mental health problems with some of his close colleagues, stating that, even with this Alexa in the counseling, the depression episodes still come and go. That's unpleasant enough. What is really scary is the paranoia. When I get these paranoid episodes, of course I regret them thoroughly when they are over, but when I'm going through them, it's as if I'm a passenger on a ride.
Damn, that's kind of deep though, you feel
I wish I could control
me?
the thoughts in my mind.
Okay.
It's hard enough sometimes controlling my behavior.
Damn.
Along with the warrant to search his lab, the
When
FBI
I'm
also
when
obtained a
I'm being
warrant to
eaten
search his
alive
home,
inside.
where they found a
What was he
significant amount
talking
of
to
guns and ammunition, as well as homemade body
no.
armor in a makeshift shooting range in the basement. Along with these items was news clippings of the FBI's investigation into Stephen Hatfill, letters Ivins had written to Congress members, as well as multiple documents, one of which was titled Themes, seemingly listing a series of defenses he could use if he was under suspicion. Defenses that included 1. That psychiatric problems, quote, made me do it. 2. That political reasons, get Patriot Act plus other legislation, quote, made me do it. 3. That financial reasons, make money off new vaccine, quote, made me do it. 4. That I deliberately submitted anthrax samples that were either contaminated, altered, adulterated, or otherwise different from what they were stated to be. But on a high-profile case like this, the FBI could not afford another media circus. They had already been embarrassed by the media before for pursuing the wrong suspect, so this time, if they wanted to bring Ivins in, they had to be sure. They tapped his phone, tracked his movements, and even routinely went through his trash. But as the years went on and the surveillance continued, Bruce's condition only worsened. He was prescribed almost double his original dose for antidepressants, and according to his friends, began feeling increasingly trapped. His work, something that at one point was his greatest pride, began to suffer as well, as in early 2007, he spilled some anthrax on his body and did not take the necessary steps to clean it up. In a high-level anthrax lab like the one at USAMRIID, this was unacceptable. He was barred from laboratory spaces and was only allowed to do administrative work from then on. This was a massive blow. The very next day, Bruce's wife found Bruce laying on the floor of their home, unconscious, believed to have overdosed on his anxiety medication. After being rushed to hospital, Ivan survived, but not unscathed. Following the attempt, his mental state had reached threatening lows. He began treatment to get
sucks.
sober
I'm
and
not gonna lie.
individual therapy sessions to address his mental health.
Near
It was
death,
from here on that Bruce
having an
lost control.
unsuccessful
He
suicidal
began threatening to
experience,
kill
that
other
shit
members
does
of the therapy
very
group,
much taint
his
your
former
mental. I'm not gonna lie, that
colleagues,
shit
FBI
sucks.
agents, even laying out
Like you
detailed
think you're
plans of
fucked,
how
you
he
think
would
you're
do
fucked
this.
up, and then you're like, all right,
He
I'm gonna end it right
acknowledged to
here. It's
others that
over.
he
It's
was the
good. We're all
FBI's
good.
prime
You know,
suspect
whatever.
for the
Fuck it. We
anthrax
letting it
killer
all
and
go.
was not
And
planning
then you
on
survive.
being
You're like,
indicted for the
that
murders.
shit gets worse,
He was
bro.
going to, quote,
I swear to
go
don't
out
do
and
that
blaze a
shit.
ploy,
Don't even think about
telling
doing that
others
shit.
to, quote, see me in
Just
the papers.
focus on being
As a
happier.
result of this
I know
behavior,
it's hard. You think
psychiatrists
you
could
fucked
only
up.
conclude
I
that
know,
he was
but like,
becoming a
damn,
threat
bro.
to himself and others, and
Like,
placed him
listen,
on a
bro. You
10-day
fuck that shit up, bro.
involuntary psychiatric hold.
It's spooky.
After being released, the very next day, his wife found him the same way she had found him before, unconscious, on the ground, after consuming a copious amount of over-the-counter medication. Only this time, he wouldn't pull through. After drifting in and out of consciousness throughout the night, Bruce Ivins died on July 29th, 2008.
Anthrax scientists
On his
commit
final
suicide
night,
as
he wrote a
FBI
handwritten
closes
note to
in.
his wife. It said only a few words. Please let me sleep.
Damn.
Following the
God
death of Bruce
damn, he
Ivins,
fucking me.
the
I don't even.
FBI
I
were
feel
at
like
a
it's him.
loss. This was their
So I
number
kind of
one
don't want to feel
suspect.
bad for him, but I
Agents
kind of
had
feel
spent
bad
thousands of
for
hours
him
gathering
though.
evidence against him, hoping to finally put the highly publicized
sleep.
case to rest. But with his death, the whole operation fell through.
Researcher who killed himself this week as the government moved toward indicting him and seeking the death penalty.
How could they put the case to rest if their prime suspect could no longer be put on trial? Determined to not let years of their hard work go down the drain, they knew that they could not let this case remain unsolved. On August 6, 2008, the Department of Justice held a press conference. Here, they decided that due to the extraordinary
and justified public interest in this investigation, as well as the significant public attention resulting from the death of Dr. Bruce Edward Ivins last week, today we are compelled to take the extraordinary step of providing first the victims and their families, as well as Congress and the American public, with an overview of some recent developments, as well as some of our conclusions. Based upon the totality of the evidence we had gathered against him, we are confident that Dr. Ivins was the only person responsible for these attacks.
What followed was the release of the Antrhax Investigative Summary, an almost 100-page report containing an overview of the FBI's entire investigation into the 2001 anthrax attacks, culminating in their certainty that Bruce Ivins was the sole perpetrator behind the attacks. The 2001 anthrax attacks, coupled with the attacks of 9/11 that occurred just weeks earlier, completely altered not only the American public's perceived sense of security, but also the future of American politics. Since the very first letter, the government and the public were fully prepared to accept the easy lie, rather than the hard truth.
Are we zooming in on Bush like this? Hold up.
Anthrax quickly became another talking point to garner support for the ill-advised war in Iraq.
This is just about the amount of a teaspoon. Less than a teaspoonful of dry anthrax in an envelope shut down the United States Senate in the fall of 2001. This forced several hundred people to undergo emergency medical treatment and killed 2 postal workers. Iraq declared 8,500 liters of anthrax, but unscum.
It would take not only years, but thousands of American and Iraqi lives to prove that this information was wrong.
And as I've said on many occasions, I deeply regret that the information, some of the information, not all of it, some of the information I presented, which was multi-source, was wrong.
Even at home, it was these attacks that bolstered Congress's support for highly controversial policies like the Patriot Act, the ethics of which are still being debated to this day. The national and global fallout of the anthrax attacks was immense and far-reaching. But for the families of Robert Stevens, Joseph Gersine, Thomas Morris Jr., Kathy Nguyen, and Ottilie Lundgren, the fallout hit them right at home. Like them, there are countless lives who have been completely altered by these attacks, and the story that we were fed surrounding them. The actions of one man have changed the world as we know it, and as we live in the aftermath, the question that remains is not only why it happened, but how much of the stories we're told we're willing to question.
Damn, that was a fucking banger vid, though. That shit was cool. I'm telling you, bro. These motherfuckers don't play, bro. Hold up. Is it pop up the name? Yeah, there you go. I'm predictable. I'll pull it up on it. You know what I'm saying? That shit was cold as fuck, but then there was another letter. Nah, fuck around. That's not funny. That's fucked up. You think the crazy theory here, you think it was set up? You think they killed him? He OD'd? And then they're like, well, it was him. It was just him. It was only him. But I don't know. I think they'd be better off just blaming it on Iraq, considering the war at the time, which was very controversial. But that was it. That was a fucking outstanding vid. That was great. Some of these scientists are weird, man. Other note though, another sidebar. That shit's kind of dope. Like when I say that, let me elaborate, right? Because you motherfuckers out here doing anthrax killings. All right, cool. If you like grow up and you're real interested in some shit like that and some science shit, and then you're able to be like to get good enough at it that you get educated, and then you get put in a position where you have a fucking job and you got your own lab. He had a decent house. He'd go to his lab, just clock in how much time he's at the lab, do his experiments that he wants to do. It's like he's getting funded for that shit. That's just kind of dope, man. He was doing his thing, but then he lost it.